Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of this particular video. By name, I am Japhet Okaka Ebusetali. So for today's video, under criminal law, it's going to be based under criminal law, and today we are going to be looking at the defense of accident under the criminal code. We'll be looking at the defense of accident under the criminal code, and also we'll be answering the question whether or not actions that were carried out intentionally, these actions were carried out intentionally but resulted in an unforeseeable and unintended consequence. With that end result to be covered by the defense of accidents, we are going to be answering that particular question. And also we'll also be looking at accidental discharge. We'll also be looking at the difference between accident under the criminal code and accident under the penal code. Also, we'll be distinguishing between accidental killing and manslaughter, so that you will not confuse both accidental killing with manslaughter. So we'll be distinguishing between accidental killing and manslaughter. But first and foremost, let's look at the defense of accident under the criminal code. Let's look at the defense of accidents under the criminal code. And then this brings us to section 24 of the criminal code. Section 24 of the criminal code. Let's look at section 24 of the criminal code. Section 24, it says, subject to the express provisions of this code relative to negligent acts and omission, a person is not criminally responsible for an act or omission which occurred independently of the exercise of his will or for an event which occurs by accident. That is the provision of section 24 under the criminal code. Now, let's look at the definition of accident by Black Law Dictionary before dissecting this particular section. So before dissecting this particular section, let's look at the definition of accident under the Black Law Dictionary. Black Law Dictionary. Black Law Dictionary define accident as an unintended, it is unintended and unforeseen injurious or occurrence, an unintended and unforeseen injurious occurrence, something that does not occur in the usual course of events, something that does not occur in the usual course of events, or that could not reasonably be anticipated, or that could not be reasonably be anticipated. That's the definition of accident under the Black Law Dictionary. Now, let's go back to section 24 of the criminal code. Let's go back and dissect section 24 of the criminal code. Let's look at section 24 of the criminal code. It says that subject, mark that word, subject, exception, it's an exception, subject to the express provision of this code relative to negligent acts and omission. That's the first part. And this first part simply says that negligent acts and omissions are not covered by the defense of accident. When you carry out an act that was, yes, it was unintended, but when you carry out this act, you were being negligent, you cannot raise the defense of accident. The defense of accident will not avail you. Though it was unintended, but because you were negligent, the defense of accident will not avail you. So for further clarity, let's look at the case of Iromatu versus the state. Let's look at the case of Uzuka versus the state. Uzuka versus the state. Let's look at the case of Uzuka versus the state. So in Samsi Uzuka versus the state, D and his colleague, two policemen stationed at a toll gate, pursued and caught up with V. Two policemen stationed at a toll gate, they pursued and caught up with V's vehicle. So as they were questioning V, these two policemen, they were questioning V, they were questioning him. So as they were questioning V, this gun went off and killed V. As these two policemen were questioning V inside his vehicle, this gun went off and killed V. This gun went off and killed V. So the question was whether or not, based on the circumstances of this case, whether or not the defense of accident avails D. Whether or not accident avails D. Whether or not, following the circumstances of this case, whether the defense of accidents availed D following the circumstances of this case. Now, what was the holding of the court? What did the court decide in this particular case? Let's look at the holding of the court. The court held that although the firing of the gun was not this weed act, though D did not intend to fire this gun at V, nevertheless, he was grossly negligent in the manner he held the gun. Nevertheless, he was grossly negligent in the manner in which he held the gun. D was not entitled to the benefits of this section. So you see it, yes, D, a policeman, he did not intend to fire this particular gun at V. Yes, there was no intention to fire the gun, but nevertheless, he was negligent. And due to the fact he was negligent, the court held that the defense of accident will not avail D. Now, that's the first part of section 24. Try to say that the defense of accident will not avail anyone as far as the actions of the person was negligent. As far as the person was negligent, the defense of accident will not avail. That's the first part. Now, let's then look at the second part of section 24. The latter part of that particular provision of section 24. Let's move on. It says that a person is not criminally responsible for an act or omission which occurs independently of the exercise of his will. For an act or omission which occurs independently of the exercise of his will, number one, or that's another perspective, or for an event which occurs by accident, or for an event which occurs by accident. The event was accidental. The end result was accidental. So, for an act or omission which occurs independently of the exercise of his will, it means that it was involuntary. So now, let's then look at this first perspective, the involuntary act. Section 24 says, for an act or omission which occurs independently of the exercise of his will. So it means that this Mr. A's action, was not intended. Mr. A did not intend to kill Mr. B. Mr. A did not intend to kill Mr. B, and Mr. A was not negligent. You must note that he must not be negligent. Mr. A did not intend to kill Mr. B. So that's what the first part is talking about. It was involuntary. It was independent of the exercise of his will. It was independent of the exercise of his will. The actions or omissions of Mr. A were by accident. They were not intended. They were not intended. So now let's then look at this first perspective, this particular line of section 24. Let's then look at this perspective of section 24, and then this will bring us to the case of Iromatu versus the states. Iromatu versus the states. Let's look at the case of Iromatu versus the states. So in Iromatu versus the states, the disease gripped the appellant gun. The person that died gripped the appellant gun, and the appellant is the accused. He gripped the appellant gun in an attempt to recover it from him. The disease gripped the appellant gun. So the appellant was trying to recover the gun from the disease. So in an attempt to recover it from him, the appellant accidentally, independently of the exercise of his will, accidentally touched the trigger. independently of the exercise of his will, accidentally touched the trigger, and the gun went off. And killed the deceased. It was heard that Section 24 applied. You see it. One, you must note that in this particular case, the appellant was not negligent. And number two, it was independent of the exercise of his will, in that he was holding the gun. The deceased came and grabbed the gun from the appellant. The appellant tried to recover the gun and accidentally touched the trigger. And the gun went off, and the deceased died. The court held that the defense of accidents availed the accused. Why? Because it was independent of the exercise of his will. That's it for the defense of accidents. When one is not being negligent, and when one did not intend to carry out this particular action, when the actions were carried out independently of the exercise of his will, the defense of accidents will avail the person. So that is it for the defense of accidents. But however, it does not stop there. Let's then look at the end part. It says, or for an event which occurs by accident. Or for an event which occurs by accident. An event that occurs by chance. Yes, so this latter part, this ending part is trying to say that, yes, when one did not intend to carry out this action, when Mr. A did not intend to kill Mr. B, the defense of accidents will avail Mr. A, especially when it was accidental. However, it also says that when one intends to carry out a particular action, but however, after carrying out this particular action, the end result of an intended action was unforeseeable. For example, Mr. A slaps Mr. B. Now, if you look at this particular hypothetical scenario I just drew, you see that Mr. A intended to slap Mr. B. But however, if Mr. A slaps Mr. B and then Mr. B dies, just after giving Mr. B a honorary slap, and Mr. B is died, this particular perspective of Section 24 is trying to say that the defense of accident will avail Mr. A because it was an event which occurs by accident. That event was not unforeseeable. That event was unintended. So yes, this is even answering that particular question. So yes, an act carried out unintentionally, the defense of accident will avail the accused. For unintended acts, it was carried out independently of the exercise of his will, the defense of accident will avail. And also, when one intends to carry out a particular act, he purposely carries out this act. He purposely slaps Mr. A, and in the process of slapping Mr. A dies, and the end result, that's the latter part, and the end result of carrying out an intended act, of carrying out the end result and the end consequence of carrying out an intended act is unforeseeable. Nobody can foresee it. Nobody can foresee that if you slap Mr. A, if you slap Mr. B, Mr. B will die. The defense of accident will avail you when the end result is unforeseeable and unintended, despite the fact the actions of Mr. A was voluntary. So you can see it. Yes. So you can see that Section 24 is quite short, but very broad. So when one intends to carry out a particular act, but the end consequence is unforeseeable and unintended, the defense of accidents will avail such individual. So for better clarity, let's look at the case of Suchuku versus the state. Suchuku versus the state. Let's look at the case of Suchuku versus the state. Now, in this particular case, Kabiri White, GSC, said that where the voluntary act, you see it, where the voluntary act, it is voluntary, it is intended. Mr. A intended to slap Mr. B, where the voluntary act results in an event which was neither intended. You see it? Which was neither intended nor foreseen. The consequences is an accident. Period. Period. That is it for this other perspective. Now, also, let's look at the case of Venus versus Aaron. Venus versus Aaron. Let's look at the case of Venus versus Aaron. In this case of Venus versus Aaron, Dizon, CJ, stated that I think. Now, he's trying to define the term an event which occurs by accident, an event which occurs by chance. So you see, he's trying to define it. Now, look at what he stated. He stated, I think that this is somewhat difficult. This is somewhat difficult phrase covers events which the person who might otherwise be criminally responsible neither intended nor foresaw as possible result of his conduct. Neither intended nor foresaw as possible result of his conduct. Period. So that's how he defined an event which occurs by accident, an event which occurs by chance. But then let's still move forward. Let's also go back. Let's go back to Black Law Dictionary definition of accident. Black Law Dictionary define accident as that which does not occur. You see it? Which does not occur in the ordinary course of events. As that which does not occur in the ordinary course of events. So he answers the question. That yes, by the provision of section 24, if someone does not intend to carry out a particular act, and then he carries out this particular act independently of the exercise of his will, it was involuntary, it was not purposeful, the defense of accident will avail. Period. However, when one intends to carry out a particular act, but then the end result was not foreseeable and was not intended, then the defense of accident will avail. So it works in two ways. It's like a coin with two sides, this side and this other side. So now let's then look at the case of Audu. This is one of the most beautiful cases where this particular provision of section 24 was the ending part of section 24 was very much illustrated. Let's look at the case of Audu Umoru versus the state. Audu Umoru versus the state. Audu Umoru versus the state. Now, in this particular case of Audu Umoru versus the state, V returned home. Early one morning, packed his car and came out. V returned home one early morning. He packed his car and came out from his car. S, that's another person. S challenged him for parking his car where he did. S came. Say, where did you park your car? Why did you park your car there? So S was challenging V for parking his car where he did. V included him. V included S. D, that's another person now. D, who was sitting with S. D, who was sitting with S, went up to V and slapped him on the forehead. You see it? S and D were sitting down. V came, he parked his car somewhere and came out. S stood up and challenged V. Why did you park your car there? V ignored S. He kept on moving. Then D stood up. D that was very sitting down with S before, he stood up from his chair and went to go and meet V and slap V on his forehead. Now, see what happened. V fell, hit his head on the tarred road and died 3 days later. So, after D gave V a slap, V fell on the ground. From the slap, he fell on the ground, hit his head on the tarred road and died 3 days later. Now, the charge of the High Court convicted D of manslaughter. That was what the High Court did. The High Court convicted D that gave V a slap. It convicted D of manslaughter. But then look at what the court heard. The Court of Appeal heard let's look at the decision of the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal held that the second lip of Section 24 exculpated D. This death was an accidental event. You see it. The Court of Appeal held no, you cannot convict D of manslaughter. The second part of Section 24 exculpated D. The Court of Appeal stated that this death was an accidental event because, you see that, because it was not intended and not reasonably probable, because it was unintended and not reasonably probable. So you see that. So yes, D intended to slap. D intended to slap V. D intended to slap B. But however, the end result, the end consequence of that slap was unintended. Because by the time D was slapping V, he never knew that if I slap Mr. V will fall down the road and die. He never knew that. And also, death was not reasonably probable. Death, no reasonable man will say that if you slap somebody, the person will fall down and die. It was not reasonably probable. It was not reasonably foreseeable. So the Court of Appeal held that D, the defense of accidents, availed D in this particular case. So that is it for the provision of Section 24 under the Criminal Code. So you see, for the defense of accidents, in a nutshell, for the defense of accidents to avail you, you must not be negligent. That is it. That's the condition. That is a condition precedent. For the defense of accident to avail you, you must not be negligent. Your actions and your missions must not be negligent. And also, for the defense of accident will avail you. That was for the defense of accident to avail you. Now, the defense of accident will avail you when your actions were unintended, when it was independently of the exercise of your will. The defense of accident will avail you. And also, the defense of accident will avail you where the event that occurs was by accident, where the event that occurs was not foreseeable, where the event that occurs was not intended. So that is it for Section 24 of the Criminal Code. So now, let's go to the tests. There are several tests. There are several tests placed in place. There are several tests that have been placed in place for the courts to look at to actually see whether the defense of accident will avail a pattern. There are two tests that are in place that the court will look at to arrive at a conclusion as to whether or not the defense of accidents will avail this particular party. So now, let's look at the two tests. So, the first test, let's look at the two tests. So, the first test is the proximate and direct consequence judicial opinion. The proximate and direct consequence judicial opinion. This is the first test. Now, what does this test say? This test says that an accident is an event which is too remote and indirect a consequence of the accused's unlawful act. So what's this particular test? What's the test of proximate and direct consequences? Trying to say that an accident is an event that is too remote. It's too far. There is almost no connection between the events that occurred and the actions of the accused. That's the first test. But however, the second test is the foreseeability test. This is the most used test, the foreseeability test. It is the test of a reasonable man. It is an objective test. It's a test. The test is that will a reasonable man in the accused standing, a reasonable man in the accused shoe, will a reasonable man in the accused shoe foreseen that if I do this particular action, this will be the end result. Is the end result foreseeable? Is the end result of a particular action foreseeable for you to say that it is an accident? This is the foreseeability test, and this was well applied in the case of Bayo Ademulola versus the state. This foreseeability test was applied in Bayo Adelumola versus the state. So now let's look at Bayo Ademulola versus the state. Bayo Ademulola versus the state. So in Bayo Adelumola versus the state, the Supreme Court considered the defense of accident. Now let's look at the facts of the case. D alphabet D threw a burning stove at V. D took a burning stove. His stove was on. There was fire. He took this burning stove and threw it at V. Now let's go on. She caught fire. V caught fire and died subsequently. After D threw this burning stove at V caught fire and died subsequently. So D raised the defense of accident. D was trying to say, it was accidental. When I took this stove and threw it at V, I never intended that V is going to die. It was unforeseeable that V would die when I took this stove and threw it at V. So D raised the defense of accident. Now let's look at the decision of the Supreme Court. In the Supreme Court, the issue of accident was considered and rejected. The issue of accident was considered and rejected. Oputa, JSA, who read the leading judgment, held that throwing the stove at V was D's Will's act. Number one, when D took the stove and threw it at V, it was D's Will's act. And also the event that followed it was V's death. It was foreseeable that when you carry a burning stove, when you carry a stove that is burning and throw it at another person, there's a foreseeability that this person might die. So you cannot raise the defense of accident. So let's also look at another case to further illustrate it, and that's the case of the state versus Afon. State versus Afon. So in this particular case, two boys, A and B, were pushing each other near a river. A and B were pushing each other near a river. You see, it was near a river. Near a river. A third boy saw them push each other near a river. Now look at what this third boy did. The third boy warned them that they were playing a dangerous game. A and B were pushing each other. A third party saw them. He said, "No, stop, you are playing a dangerous game. See river there." He wants them. So let's then continue. Following a push by A. So A pushed B now. Despite the warning, A pushed B. B slipped and fell into the river and drowned. So after A pushed B, despite the warning, B slipped and fell into the river and drowned and died there. It was heard that B's death was not an accidental event. Why? Why did they say that B's death was not an accidental event when A did not intend to cause the death of B? So why did the court held that B's death was not an accidental event, despite the fact that A did not intend to cause the death of B? So it was held to be unincidental because a reasonable person, foreseeability test, because a reasonable person would have appreciated the danger of pushing another person near a river in the circumstances. Because a reasonable man in his shoes will say that there is a river here. If I push B B might fall and enter this river, and also a third party one day. So there's a foreseeability that death will occur. There's a foreseeability that the events, the health consequence will occur. So you cannot raise the defense of accident. So these are the two tests used by the courts. The proximate and direct consequence judicial opinion and the foreseeability test. These are the two tests used by the courts. So, having done justice to the defense of accident, let's then move on to accidental discharge. Is there a particular defense called accidental discharge? Can you go to the courts? Can you go to the courts and raise the defense of accidental discharge? Let's then look at the defense of accidental discharge. So, first and foremost, you must note that there is no defense. There is no defense called accidental discharge. There's no defense called accidental discharge. It is a specie of the defense of accident. So you cannot say, there is the defense of provocation, there is the defense of insanity, there is the defense of accident, there is the defense of accidental discharge. No, there is no defense of accidental discharge. It is a specie. It is under the defense of accident. It is not a defense on its own, but rather it is under the defense of accident. So there is no defense called accidental discharge. So what is accidental discharge? In Ajose versus the State, it was held that where a person discharges a firearm, a gun, unintentionally and without the antecedent criminal malice or negligence, there was no malice and there was no negligence. It was not done maliciously and it was not done negligently. He will be exempted for criminal liability. That is it for accidental discharge. So yes, there is no particular defense called accidental discharge. Accidental discharge is under the defense of accidents, and it happens when Mr. A unintentionally pulls the trigger, as seen in the earlier case, when Mr. A unintentionally pulls the trigger, as seen in the case of Roma 2 versus the States, when Mr. A unintentionally pulls the trigger, the defense of accident will avail. So there is no defense called the defense of accidental discharge. Accidental discharge is a specie of the defense of accident. It is under the defense of accident. So let's then move forward. Now we will not be looking at the difference between accident under the criminal code and accident under the penal code. So we will be looking at accident under the criminal code, that it must not be done negligently, and also an unintentional act, an act that was carried out independently of the exercise of someone's will. The defense of accident will avail the person, and when the end result, when the end consequence of an intended act is unforeseeable, the end result will be an accident. So, but now let's then look at the difference between accidents under the criminal code. The difference between accident under the criminal code and accidents under the penal code. There is a distinction between accident under the criminal code and accident under the penal code. They differ in Nigeria. So let's then look at the difference between accidents under the criminal code and accidents under the penal code. So let's go to section 42 of the penal code. Section 48 of the penal code provided for the defense of accidents. So now let's look at section 48 of the penal code. And it says, nothing is an offense. Nothing is an offense which is done by accident. Nothing is an offense which is done by accident or misfortune. Accident or misfortune, and without any criminal intention or knowledge. And without any criminal intention or knowledge in the course of doing. You see it? Here is the difference between accident under the criminal code and accident under the penal code. In the course of doing a lawful act in a lawful manner, by lawful means, with proper care and caution. So here is where the difference lies in. While the defense of accident under the criminal code, when an act is done, when it is an unlawful act, the defense of accident can also avail when it is an unlawful act. For example, Mr. A slaps Mr. B. That's unlawful. That's assault. That's unlawful. The law provided for assault in the criminal code. Assault is provided for in the criminal code. It is an unlawful act. But yet, if Mr. B despite after giving a slap, dies from the slap, section 24 of the criminal code we avail Mr. A, despite the fact it was unlawful, despite the fact slapping someone is prohibited due to the fact it is an assault. It is an assault, or you can also constitute a battery. But however, under section 48 of the criminal code, it says that it must be a lawful act. So when it is an unlawful act, the defense of accident will not avail that person under the penal code, but it will avail the person under the criminal code. So that's the distinction. For accident under the penal code, it must be a lawful act. Number one, it must be done. It must be a lawful act. It must be in a lawful manner. It must be carried out by lawful means. So you see the plenty conditions, and also it must be done with proper care and caution. That's the distinction between accident under the penal code and accident under the criminal code. All these conditions are not stipulated in section 24 of the criminal code. They are not stipulated in section 24 of the criminal code, but they are stipulated in section 48 of the penal code. So now let's look at a particular case to illustrate this. Let's look at a particular case to illustrate this, and that's the case of Jagasha versus EMP. Jagasha versus EMP. So in this particular case, the accused was beating the deceased. The accused was beating the deceased. The accused hit the baby while trying to hit the mother. So while the accused was trying to hit the mother, he mistakenly hit the baby. Mistakenly, and it was unintentional. It was unintentional. It was unforeseeable that I might hit this baby. It was unforeseeable, and it was unintentional. So he mistakenly hit the baby, and the baby died of the blow. So what was the holding of the court? It was held that the defense of accident did not avail the accused. Why? Because his act was unlawful. Because his act was unlawful. So for the defense of accident to avail one under the penal code, such acts must be lawful. If it's an unlawful act, the defense of accident will not avail. If Mr. A slaps Mr. B and Mr. B dies under the penal code, and Mr. B died under the penal code, the defense of accident may not avail. Why? Because it was an unlawful act. But it will avail under the criminal code, despite the fact that it was an unlawful act. So let's then go to the last perspective for this particular video, because our time is already fast spent. Let's then move on to the last perspective for this particular video, and that's the difference between accidental killing and manslaughter. Manslaughter is usually the unintentional killing of someone. If you tell someone define manslaughter, they will tell you unintentional killing of someone. Unintentional killing of someone. That's what they will say. But however, what's the thing difference between manslaughter and accidental killing? Killing by accident. Killing, the killing of someone, you kill someone, but the court will say it was accident. The defense of accident will avail. So what's the difference between accidental killing and manslaughter? So first and foremost, you must note this. You must note that manslaughter are of two types. Manslaughter are of two categories. One, we have voluntary manslaughter, and two, we have involuntary manslaughter. Voluntary manslaughter and involuntary manslaughter. What's voluntary manslaughter? For voluntary manslaughter, Mr. A intended to kill Mr. B. The intention was there. The intention was there. Mr. A took a knife. Mr. A takes a knife, stabs Mr. B. The intention was there. But however, the court will say that it is not murder, but it is manslaughter, due to the fact that, for example, provocation. For example, provocation. Mr. A takes a particular knife and kills and stabs Mr. B. That's maybe probably because he saw Mr. B beating his mother. That would be provocation. You can say he was provoked in that he done that in the heat of passion. So that's voluntary manslaughter. There was an intention to kill the deceased. That's voluntary manslaughter. And that's, for example, the defense of provocation. When the defense, when you successfully play the defense of provocation, it will be said to be manslaughter, and it will constitute voluntary manslaughter. Now, what's involuntary manslaughter? For involuntary manslaughter, voluntary manslaughter, there is no such intention. The intention to kill this particular person was not present. But death occurs as a result of an unlawful conduct, likely to cause harm, but not grievous harm, e.g., negligence. So, yes, when Mr. A, for example, when Mr. A takes a gun, and he was holding this gun negligently, he's a police officer, he was holding this gun negligently, he was firing it in the air. As he was firing it in the air, he mistakenly shot someone. Now, there was no intention to kill this particular person. There was no intention, but the court will hold that this is manslaughter and not accidental killing. Why? Because of negligence. So you can see manslaughter is divided into two. Voluntary manslaughter, there is intention to kill this particular person, just the way I used the example of provocation. But for involuntary manslaughter, there is no intention to kill this particular person, and that's when there is gross negligence or recklessness. And I use the example of negligently holding a gun. So that's it for manslaughter. However, for accidental killing, there must be no negligence. You see it, there must be no negligence, and also it does not occur during the commission of a crime. So for you to say that I killed someone, the defense of accident should avail me, it should not be manslaughter. Number one, there must be lack of negligence. It must not be as a result of negligence. If it's as a result of negligence, because we say that it is involuntary manslaughter, despite the fact there was no intention. And also, there must be lack of intention. If there is intention, it will constitute voluntary manslaughter. And also, it should not occur within the commission of a crime. When Mr. A takes a gun and goes to go and rob Mr. B, and in the process of robbing Mr. B, he accidentally fired the trigger, you cannot raise the defense of accident, despite the fact that you accidentally or unconsciously put the trigger. When you went to go and rob someone, it will be deemed that death was a foreseeable event of robbing someone. it will be deemed that when you went out to go and when you went out to go and commit this particular crime, it will be deemed that death was a foreseeable event of going out to go and commit that particular crime. So there must be lack of negligence, lack of intention, and it must not occur within the commission of a crime. So this is the clear distinction between accidental killing, and manslaughter. And another thing you should note is that for manslaughter, it must be an unlawful act. It must be an unlawful act and a dangerous act. It must be an unlawful act and a dangerous act. For example, let's look at the case of Rasulu versus the state. Rasulu versus the state. So in Rasulu versus the state, D threw a plier at V, hitting V on the head and causing the death of V. But however, D was convicted of the offense of manslaughter. You'll not be like, D took a plier and threw it at V. D took a plier and threw it at V. But the court convicted D of manslaughter, and the defense of accident did not avail D. Why did the defense of accident not avail D in the case of Rasulu versus the state? Because it was an unlawful act and a very dangerous act. Death was a probable cause. When you take a plier and you are trying to throw that heavy plier at a particular party, a reasonable man will reason that death might probably happen. Death is a probable cause of taking that plier and throwing it at another party. So for manslaughter, it is an unlawful act and a dangerous act. It is an unlawful act and a dangerous act. When an act is unlawful and very dangerous, it is very dangerous. The defense of accident will not also avail you. But however, when it is unlawful but not dangerous, for example, Mr. A slaps Mr. B, as we see in that earlier case, the defense of accident will avail. Why? Because it was not dangerous. It was unlawful, but also it was not dangerous. Death was not a probable consequence. But however, where it is very dangerous, as seen in this case of Rasulu versus the state, it will constitute manslaughter, and the defense of accident will not avail. So this is distinction between accidental killing and manslaughter. So that is it for the defense of accident under the Criminal Code. So for the defense of accident under the Criminal Code, it must not be negligent. It must not be carried out negligently, and also where your actions were carried out independently of the exercise of your will, the defense of accident will avail you. And also where one intentionally carries out a particular act and the end result was unintended and unforeseeable, the defense of accident will also avail you, as we earlier stated. So this is it for the defense of accident. And as usual, by name, I am Japhet Okaka Ebusetale. Thank you so much for watching.